She's an intelligence officer, Colonel Phelps said, and his voice carried the particular flatness of a man who considers the conversation already closed. She processes signals data and writes assessments. She does not belong on this range with these men. He glanced toward the line of shooters still standing at their positions, then back at the woman who had just raised her hand. His expression settled somewhere between amusement and contempt. 9 of the finest precision marksmen on this installation have already stood on that firing line. NATO observers are watching, and now we're going to hand the rifle to the intelligence clerk. The laughter from 2 or 3 men behind him was not loud, but it was the kind that carries. The kind designed to reach its target. Sergeant First Class Dunbar had heard that kind of laughter before. She had heard it at her first posting, at her qualification exams, at briefings where she had been the only woman in a room full of men who had already decided what kind of person she was before she opened her mouth. She had made a decision a long time ago that this particular sound would not be the thing that determined what she did next. Before this story goes any further, if you've ever known what it's like to have your capabilities dismissed before they've been tested, subscribe to Ranger Stories and stay until the very end. Drop a comment and tell us where in Canada you're watching from. These stories travel farther than you'd think. The morning at Fort Mackenzie had started the way January mornings in northern Montana tend to start, with a cold that had no interest in negotiating. By 0700, the temperature on the northern evaluation range had dropped to -14 Celsius, and the crosswind out of the northwest was steady at 23 kilometers per hour, with unpredictable gusts that the range meteorologist had flagged twice in his briefings. The ground was frozen solid beneath a skin of overnight snow. The flags along the range perimeter moved in hard, sudden snaps. Dunbar had been on base since 0530, reviewing a backlog of intelligence assessments she needed cleared before a briefing the following morning. She was 34 years old, 11 years in the Army, and she wore her experience the way people who have done serious work for a long time wear it. Not obviously, not for effect, but in the particular quality of her attention. The way she read a page, or a room, or a set of conditions, without appearing to be doing anything at all. Her hair was pulled back. Her uniform was pressed in the specific way of someone who takes the small disciplines seriously, because they believe the small disciplines are connected to everything else. At 0840, her intelligence NCO, Sergeant Gibbs, appeared at her office door with the careful expression he got when he had information she hadn't asked for, but that she might want. "Ma'am," he said, "you might want to come out to the northern range?" She looked up from her assessments. He told her about the joint NATO marksmanship evaluation that Brigadier General Arnett had arranged. The 9 shooters from 4 different units who had each taken their attempts at the 3,800-meter mark, and the fact that all 9 had been told the same thing by the range officer's radio. "Miss," she was quiet for a moment. Her pen moved between her fingers, a habit she'd had since university, something she did when she was working through a problem she wasn't yet ready to speak aloud. "I'll be there in 15 minutes, she said. She didn't tell Gibbs why. The northern evaluation range was the longest on the installation. It stretched from a raised firing platform across frozen scrubland in a shallow river valley, terminating at a target array just under 4 kilometers distant. In summer, it was a difficult range. In January, with the wind doing what it was doing and the temperature sitting where it was sitting, it was the kind of range that tested every variable a shooter had ever trained for and introduced several they hadn't. Thermal inversion layers at certain altitudes created distortions that bent trajectory in ways the standard calculation tables didn't fully account for. At 3,800 meters, a bullet from a standard platform would be in the air for more than 4 seconds. In that time, the wind could shift. The Earth's rotation would carry the target laterally by a calculable margin. Gravity would pull the projectile through a drop of roughly 800 meters of arc before it arrived, if it arrived, where the shooter had intended. 9 men had stood on that platform. 9 of them had gone through their preparations, settled into their positions, made their calculations, controlled their breathing, and squeezed their triggers. 9 times the range officer's radio had delivered its flat, unchanging report. Brigadier General Arnett stood behind the firing line with his arms crossed and his jaw set in a way that his staff recognized. He was 58 years old, 31 years in the Army, and he had developed over those 3 decades an acute sensitivity to the difference between a problem that could be solved with the resources currently available and a problem that required a different kind of thinking. He was standing at the boundary between those two categories and was not yet certain which side he was on. The NATO observers, representatives from 3 partner nations who had arranged their travel to this installation, specifically to witness this evaluation, stood nearby with expressions that were diplomatically neutral, which was its own kind of statement. That was when Dunbar arrived. She had not come to the range with any intention of making herself visible. She had signed in at the range control point, shown her credentials to the duty sergeant, and walked to the observation area behind the firing line. She had fully planned to stand there quietly. She had not fully planned for Colonel Phelps to notice her. His dismissal was swift and pointed and delivered in a voice calibrated to be heard by the men around him. The laughter followed. Dunbar did not respond to the laughter. She looked instead at Brigadier General Arnett. Arnett had turned around at the sound of Phelps's voice. He was looking at Dunbar with the measuring quality of a man who had learned, through considerable experience, that the most important assessments were often the ones he hadn't known to schedule. "Do I know you, Sergeant?" he asked. "No, sir. I don't believe we've met directly." "What's your role?" "Intelligence analysis, sir. Signals assessment and threat modeling for the northern sector." He looked at her the way he'd been looking at the distant target, with the focused attention of someone running a calculation. "You came out here on your own time." "I heard the range traffic, sir." "Yes." "And?" The pause that followed was short. 2 seconds, perhaps. But inside those 2 seconds, Dunbar made a decision she had been approaching for 11 years without ever quite arriving at it. A door she had kept closed because it was safer that way, because what was behind it was complicated and personal, and because she had learned, in the most definitive way possible, that the world does not offer women in her position the benefit of the doubt. "I'd like to try the shot, sir," she said. The silence that followed was absolute. Then Phelps laughed. It was the laugh she'd expected. Several men on the firing line echoed it quietly. Phelps's tone shifted into the register of patience that is not patience at all, but condescension wearing patience like a borrowed coat. "These are Ranger-qualified precision shooters, Sergeant. One of them is a JTF-2 operator. These are men with more hours on the long gun than most people spend in uniform. What exactly makes you think—" "Permission to speak freely, sir." She was looking at Arnett, not Phelps. Arnett studied her for a moment, then he granted it. "What I think, sir, is not the relevant variable. Either I can make the shot or I can't. The only way to find out is to let me try. If I miss, you've lost 3 minutes and gained nothing except a confirmed data point." She paused. "If I don't miss, the situation changes." Another silence. The wind moved across the range. One of the NATO observers leaned slightly toward the colleague beside him. "What rifle do you want?" Arnett asked. "Mine, sir, if I can retrieve it from my vehicle." Phelps stepped forward. "General, with respect, I don't think this is." "Philip," Arnett's voice didn't rise. It never rose, which was precisely why it was effective. "I'd like you to stop talking now." It took Dunbar 11 minutes to walk to the vehicle area and return. When she came back, she was carrying a hard case, olive drab, worn at the corners and the latches, the kind of case that had clearly been somewhere. She set it on the bench at the firing position and opened it without ceremony. The rifle inside was a modified Barrett Merad chambered in .338 Norma Magnum, a platform that, in the right hands and with the right preparation, was capable of first-round impacts at distances most trained shooters considered theoretical. This particular rifle had been modified over 14 years, a custom-contoured barrel, a Schmidt and Bender scope, with a zero-stop turret system she had calibrated herself, a trigger adjusted to a break, so clean and consistent she could reproduce it without conscious thought. It was not a military-issue weapon. It was something she had built the way some people build boats in their garage, not for anyone else to see, not for any official purpose, but because the work itself was the point. And because it connected her to a part of herself she was not yet ready to explain to anyone. Chief Warrant Officer Hagen, the senior ranger shooter among the 9 who had taken their attempts, looked at the case. He had been standing to one side since his own attempt, his expression carefully neutral. The practiced neutrality of a man not yet prepared to commit to an opinion. "That's not a standard issue platform," he said. "No," Dunbar agreed. She was attaching the suppressor to the barrel. Standard issue doesn't do what I need it to do at this distance in these conditions. Hagen watched her hands. He was quiet for a moment. You've worked with this rifle a long time. 14 years. He was quiet again. Then in a voice lower than the one he'd used before. You've shot at this range or beyond. She glanced at him. In controlled conditions, yes. Similar distances, similar wind profiles. Something shifted in his expression. Not agreement, exactly, but the opening of a question where certainty had been sitting before. He stepped back from the bench and crossed his arms and waited, which was a more substantial gesture than it appeared. Dunbar settled into the firing position. What followed was not immediately impressive to watch, which was precisely the point. She spent the first 3 minutes doing almost nothing. She lay still, her cheek resting against the stock without pressing into it, and she listened. She watched the flags at the 700-meter mark, the 2,500-meter mark, the 2,400-meter mark. She had a small field notebook, grid paper, the pages soft with use, and she opened it and wrote in pencil. Wind speed at the platform, estimated from the Beaufort characteristics she had learned to read before she had ever touched a rifle. Wind speed at the midpoint, extrapolated from flag behavior, the temperature gradient, estimated from the quality of the thermal inversion, visible at the far end of the range. The Coriolis correction for this latitude at this bearing. The estimated drop at 3,800 meters in the vicinity of 790 meters of arc. Someone behind her said something quiet. Then someone else said something back, and there was low laughter. Dunbar's pencil did not stop. When she finished the notebook, she closed it. She adjusted her position in small, deliberate increments, elbow placement, hip angle, the precise tilt of the stock against her cheekbone. She pressed her eye to the scope and found the target in the optic. At 3,800 meters, even at high magnification, it was small. Through the thermal distortions at the far end of the range, it moved in a way that was not movement, but perception. She breathed in, out, in, out. Around her, the range had gone quiet. Even the men who had been laughing had stopped. She exhaled halfway, held it, squeezed. The report was sharp and short, despite the suppressor. The rifle moved against her shoulder with the controlled authority of a proper break, and then there was nothing to do but wait. At nearly 900 meters per second, the round still needed more than 4 seconds to reach its destination. 4 seconds at minus 14 Celsius in a crosswind that had just gusted to 27 kilometers per hour and was dropping back. No one breathed. The range officer's radio crackled. Center mass, confirmed hit. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. Then Hagen said quietly and with complete sincerity, "Good Lord." It broke the room. The NATO observers were speaking to each other in low, rapid voices. One of the younger Ranger candidates turned in a slow circle, as though needing to confirm with his own eyes that the laws of physics were still in operation. General Arnett stood absolutely still, arms crossed, face giving away nothing. Phelps said, "The sensors. There must be an error in the verification system." He turned to the range officer. "Run it again." The range officer said carefully, "The system is functioning normally, Colonel. The impact was confirmed by 2 independent sensors." "Run it again," Phelps repeated. Dunbar was already getting up from the firing position. She dusted the knees of her uniform once, efficiently, then reached down and closed the rifle case with the same unhurried calm she had opened it. Her hands, if anyone had looked closely, were steady. Arnett crossed to her in 8 steps. He stopped. He looked at her with the same measuring quality as before, but with something added now, something that had not been present 20 minutes ago. "Sergeant Dunbar," he said, "how long have you been doing this?" She considered the question honestly. The full answer was complicated. "A while, sir." "That's not an answer." "No, sir, it's not." She looked at him directly. "Do you want the full answer or the one that fits the time we have right now?" Arnett was quiet for a moment. "Let's start with what fits." 14 years, she said. "I taught myself the mathematics first. Ballistics, environmental variables, Coriolis calculations. Then the mechanics. I've been using civilian ranges off base for most of my career, on my own time, with my own equipment." She paused. "The Army was not offering me a position on a precision marksmanship team, sir. I did what I could with what I had access to." The directness of it landed. Arnett absorbed it without flinching, because it was the kind of truth that does not leave room for a comfortable middle ground. "There's something else," he said. It wasn't a question, the way you read those conditions. The notebook. That's not civilian range work. She looked at him steadily. Where have you applied this, Dunbar? The wind moved across the platform. A flag at the 700-meter mark snapped once and went flat. West Africa, sir, she said, specifically Mali, 2019. The word landed differently than she had expected. Not shock. Arnett was not a man who expressed shock, but a stillness that was its own form of recognition. Mali, he repeated. Yes, sir. Multiple deployments, none of them documented under marksmanship. He looked at her for a long time, long enough that Hagen, who had drifted closer without appearing to, glanced between them and understood that something was happening here that was larger than a failed qualification evaluation and a single confirmed hit. My temporary office, Arnett said, 16:30 hours, don't be late. Yes, sir. She picked up her rifle case. She nodded once to Hagen, a small nod, the kind that carries genuine weight precisely because it isn't elaborate, and she walked off the range the way she had walked onto it. Behind her, she heard Phelps's voice begin. She did not turn around. She had 4 hours before 16:30. She used the first 20 minutes to sit in her vehicle in the parking area, engine off, hands in her lap in the cold. This was something she did when the volume of what had just happened needed somewhere to go before she could put it back in order. It was not weakness. It was the same kind of controlled processing she applied to everything else. A deliberate making of space, so that the next thing she did would be clear. Then she drove back to the intelligence section and finished her assessments. There were 3 of them outstanding. She completed them with the same focused attention she had given to the wind flags on the northern range. Inside the part of her mind running behind the work, 4 names moved in the dark. Corporal Tessier, Specialist Falco, Specialist Abiodun, Private Lorne. They were not ghosts in her thinking. She had never thought of them that way. Ghosts were things that haunted. These 4 were something else. A weight she had chosen to carry and kept carrying because setting it down would mean abandoning something that deserved better than to be put aside. She had been carrying them for 5 years. Arnett was standing when she entered his office, which surprised her. He waved her to a chair and sat across from her, and there was nothing on the desk between them. No files, no notes, just the 2 of them and whatever was about to be said. Phelps filed a formal complaint at 1540, Arnett said. He's arguing that your presence on the evaluation range was unauthorized, that your weapon was transported in violation of installation protocols, and that the verification of your impact result needs independent review before it can be entered into any official record. I know, she said. He's also making phone calls this evening. I know that as well. He looked at her for a moment. You don't appear surprised. I'm not surprised. I've been watching how these situations develop for 11 years. I'm concerned, not surprised. There's a difference. He nodded slowly. Tell me about Mali. He asked it the way someone asks a question they already know part of the answer to. Not fishing, but opening a door. She told him. She told him about the deployments, documented officially as intelligence support attachments to Joint Task Force operations in the Sahel. She told him about the role she had actually played, which was not documented at all. She told him about the 4 men who had been attached to her unit in a capacity that also did not appear in any official record. Corporal Tessier, Specialist Falco, Specialist Abiodun, Private Lorne, 22, 24, 24, and 21 years old. She told him about the operation in February 2019, about the intelligence assessment that had been approved by someone above her who had not consulted anyone with knowledge of the terrain, about the route that was supposed to be clear and wasn't, about the ambush at a dried riverbed crossing that she had seen developing from an elevated position with 30 seconds to act and a communications network someone was jamming. She told him that she had taken 4 of the ambush elements before the vehicle reached the crossing, that there had been 5, and she had not reached the 5th in time. She did not say all of this without cost, but her voice stayed level, because she had said these words to herself in the dark many times, and she had learned to carry them without letting them carry her. Arnett sat forward. His elbows came to the desk. He looked at her with the specific undivided attention of a man who has heard many accounts of difficult things and knows the difference between a true one and a constructed one. That wasn't your failure, he said. I know it wasn't, she said. I've known that for 5 years. She looked at him directly. Knowing something and being done carrying it are not the same thing. I am not done carrying it. She paused. What I can do is make sure that what I know, the mathematics, the reading of conditions, the patience, the understanding of what happens when all of those things are still not enough, gets passed to the people who come after us. So that the next time someone is at a crossing with bad intelligence and a jammed radio, there are more shooters in elevated positions, better prepared, with more time. The room was very quiet. That's why you came to the range today, Arnett said. It wasn't about proving something. No, sir. It was about being visible. Because you cannot share what no one knows you have. He was quiet for another moment. Then he opened his desk drawer and took out a folder. He set it on the desk between them and pushed it toward her. She looked at it without opening it. That's a proposal, he said. I drafted the outline this afternoon. It establishes an extreme-range marksmanship instruction program under the Army's Special Operations Training Group. Independent structure. Its own budget line, small cohorts, 12 weeks starting from ballistics, fundamentals, and building to distances that most military shooters never train at in their careers. He paused. It needs a lead instructor, someone who understands the mathematics and the conditions and the cost. He looked at her. Someone who understands what it means when the preparation isn't good enough. She picked up the folder. She opened it. She read carefully and without hurry, the way she read everything that had operational significance. When she reached the third page, she stopped. There are 4 names on the dedication line, she said. Yes, Arnett said. I thought there should be. Something moved across Dunbar's face. It was brief, the kind of thing that only exists for a moment before discipline closes over it. But it was there, the expression of someone who has been carrying a weight in private for a very long time, and has just, for the first time, seen it acknowledged by another person as real and worth honoring. I'll need to review the full program structure, she said when she was ready, and I'll need assurances about the program's independence from installation-level command, meaning Phelps, meaning anyone whose primary concern is process rather than outcome. Arnett nodded slowly. I'll get you those assurances. Then we have something to talk about, she said. Outside, the January dark had settled fully over Fort Mackenzie. The northern range was quiet. At 3,800 meters, the target stood in the cold with a new hole punched cleanly through its center. The following morning, Hagen found her in the intelligence section at 0815. He came without announcement and stood in the doorway with his cover in his hand and the expression of a man who had been thinking about something overnight and had reached a decision. I heard about the complaint, he said. Word travels fast in a unit this size. It always does, she agreed. He came in. He didn't sit. I want to provide testimony for the review, he said. Myself and 2 of my people. We were on that platform. We saw what happened. He paused. I want it on record, not just the sensor data, but what it actually means to make a first-round impact at that distance in those conditions. From someone who has spent 20 years trying to do exactly that. She looked at him. You don't have to do that. I know I don't have to, he said, and there was a trace of genuine impatience in it. I want to. There's a difference. You should know that better than most people. She held his gaze. Something in her chest shifted, not dramatically, not the way it does in films, but in the quiet way of things that have been alone for a long time becoming, unexpectedly, less alone. Thank you, she said. He was almost at the door when he stopped. One more thing. 3 of my candidates came to me this morning. The ones who hadn't stepped forward on the platform yesterday. He paused. They asked if they could be considered for whatever training program comes out of this. I thought you should know. She nodded. I appreciate that. He left. She sat for a moment. Then she opened her intelligence assessments and continued where she had left off. At 9:30, her phone rang. Private number, she answered. The voice on the other end was male, neutral, carefully stripped of any interpretable affect. He told her that the program proposal she had received would not receive final authorization. He told her that her activities had been managed, his word, with appropriate discretion, and that certain people, above General Arnett, were concerned about the institutional visibility the program would create. He told her they were not hostile to her. He told her they were watching. She listened until he finished. She said, You're telling me that the people who used what I can do in the field don't want a program that would require them to explain how they were using it. A pause. I'd encourage you to think carefully about your next steps, the voice said. She said, I'm a sergeant first class. The line went silent and then it ended. She set the phone down. She looked at the folder on her desk. Then she stood up, put on her jacket, and walked directly to Arnett's temporary office. The review took place 2 days later, convened by Colonel Westergaard from the Judge Advocate General's section. A compact, thorough woman whose reputation was built entirely on the precision with which she applied regulations, no more and no less. Phelps was there with a JAG captain and a civilian named Corbin, who wore a good suit and had the kind of face that powerful people sometimes cultivate deliberately, forgettable, neutral, and entirely managed. Hagen and his 2 men arrived 20 minutes into the proceedings, carrying a formal testimony request that Westergaard accepted without comment. Phelps objected. Westergaard informed him, with the patience of someone who had navigated this particular kind of obstruction many times before, that she determined the scope of her own reviews. The testimony was entered. The sensor data was re-examined. Dunbar answered every question directly, including the one about the weapon, which she answered the same way she had answered it for Arnett. She had made a calculation. The right tool for that shot in those conditions was the one she had built and calibrated over 14 years. Any other platform, and she might have missed. If she had missed, none of this would be happening. Westergaard wrote everything down. Her pen did not slow during the exchange between Dunbar and Corbin, and Dunbar noticed that Westergaard was not missing a single word. On the 3rd day of the review, Arnett's aide arrived at the conference room door with a folder. Westergaard read the first page. Her pen stopped for exactly 3 seconds. General Arnett, she said, with complete evenness, has submitted a formal declassification request for Sergeant First Class Dunbar's operational record in Mali, covering mission logs, authorization chains, and confirmed engagement assessments. He has also submitted a letter of commendation countersigned by 2 additional flag officers. Corbin went very still. Phelps's face moved through something that ended somewhere near pale. Dunbar sat at the table with her hands flat in front of her and breathed, because she had not known about the declassification request. Arnett had not told her. He had simply done it. He had decided, without asking her permission, that she deserved to be visible, and he had acted accordingly. She found to her genuine surprise that she could live with that. The review session ended without a finding. Corbin left first, quickly, with the focused efficiency of a man who had phone calls to make. Phelps paused at the door and looked back at Dunbar with an expression that had given up on being neutral and settled into something that was simply cold. Westergaard closed her folder. She looked at Dunbar. Off the record, she said. The counter-signatures on that letter are not insignificant. What happens next will be harder to quiet than the people who want it quiet have calculated. Go home. Get some rest. Tonight there is nothing more to do. The call came 6 days later at 0515 from a number she didn't recognize. The voice was female, older, clear and precise, in the way of someone who had spent decades treating language as a precision instrument. My name is Lieutenant General Nairn, the voice said. I'm the Army's Deputy Chief of Operations. I believe Marcus Arnett called you before calling me, which tells me something about his priorities. She paused. I've been aware of your file for approximately 3 years. I became considerably more aware of it in the past 72 hours. Dunbar sat up in the dark. Yes, ma'am. I'll be brief. I was the officer who signed the authorization parameters for the 2019 Mali operations. Not the intelligence assessment, that failure sits somewhere else, but the authorization. My signature is on the document that put your team at that crossing. The line was quiet for a moment. I have thought about that, Nairn said, a great deal, and I am calling you to say so directly because I was told that is what you deserve, and I believe that to be correct. She paused. I'll be at Fort Mackenzie in 72 hours. I need 2 hours of your time, and I need you to come prepared to make decisions. I'll see you at 0800, Sergeant. My aide will send the location. The line ended. Dunbar set the phone on the nightstand. She sat in the dark for a long moment. Then she got up, made coffee, and sat at her table with Arnett's folder in front of her, and she worked through the program structure the way she worked through any complex problem, variable by variable, from first principles, until the shape of it was clear. She worked until midnight. Then she went to sleep because she had decisions to make in 72 hours, and those decisions required a clear mind. And she had learned a long time ago that the discipline of rest was not separate from the discipline of performance. It was the same discipline. It had always been the same discipline. 3 days after the families were notified, a young soldier appeared at the door of the intelligence section. He was perhaps 23, with the particular straightness of posture that comes from being nervous and working very hard not to show it. "Private First Class Elias Tessier," he said. His voice was level. "Corporal Mark Tessier was my brother." The hallway was quiet. Dunbar held the door open. "Come inside." He sat across from her. He looked at his hands, then at her. "I know what happened," he said. "Not the official version, the real version. General Arnett's aide spoke to my family 4 days ago." He paused. "My mother spent 5 years believing Mark died on a training exercise. She blamed herself. She thought if she had called him the week before, kept him on the phone longer, if he'd come home to visit her that weekend, he would have been somewhere safe. She thought it was random. She thought it meant nothing." Dunbar did not look away from him. "It was not random," she said. "Your brother was there because he chose to be, because he was capable, and because he believed in what they were doing. What happened at that crossing was the result of decisions made above both of us that should have been made differently. And he deserved to have that said clearly to his family a long time ago." Elias Tessier nodded very slowly. He sat with that for a moment. "That's what I needed to hear," he said. "Not wanted, needed." The difference between those two words in that moment was enormous. "There's a process beginning," she said, "that may result in the official record being corrected and in your brother's name being formally honored. I can't make promises about timelines, but I can tell you that I intend to do everything in my capacity to make sure that happens." "I know," he said. "That's actually not the only reason I'm here." He straightened slightly. "I want to be in the program, ma'am. When it's authorized, I want to train under you." She looked at him. She looked at the age in his face and the determination behind it, and the grief sitting quietly in the background of both, the way grief does when you've been living with it long enough to make a kind of peace with it being there. When the first cohort formed, she said, "Put in your application." He exhaled. It was a small sound, but it carried everything in it. He stood and shook her hand. "Thank you, Captain." She did not correct him on the rank. After he left, she sat alone for a few minutes. There was a notebook on her desk, not the ballistics notebook, but a different one, older, with a plain cover. She turned to a page near the back. 4 names written there in ink that was 5 years old: Corporal Tessier, Specialist Falco, Specialist Abiodun, Private Lorne. Below the last name, she wrote one sentence slowly, with the same precision she gave to every calculation. "Their families know the truth." She closed the notebook. She put the pen down. She sat in the quiet of her office and let herself feel, fully and without rushing through it, the weight of the past 10 days. Not to wallow in it, not to perform anything, but because feeling things accurately was also a kind of precision, and she had never believed in cutting corners on anything that mattered. Then she picked up her intelligence assessments and continued. 2 weeks after the authorization for the program had cleared, and Phelps had been reassigned to a posting in Alaska that no one pretended was anything other than what it was, and the 4 names in Dunbar's notebook had been read aloud by a JAG officer to families in 4 separate cities. 2 weeks after all of that, she requested the Northern Range for 2 hours on a Tuesday morning, before any other scheduled activity. She came alone. She set up at the firing platform with her rifle, her notebook, and her pencil. She went through her preparations the way she always did: the wind, the temperature, the mathematics, the mechanics, the patience. She took 1 shot. She waited 4 seconds. Center mass, the range sensor reported, confirmed. She packed the rifle. She closed the case. She stood at the platform and looked out across the 3,800 meters of frozen flatland between herself and the target. She thought about Tessier and Falco and Abiodun and Lorne. She thought about them clearly and fully, the way she always did: their faces, the particular quality of their courage, the specific injustice of their erasure, and the ongoing work of making that erasure into something that no longer stood. She did not speak. The words had already been spoken. They were in folders and records and in letters that had been delivered to doors she had spent 5 years thinking about. What remained now was the doing. In 30 days, the first cohort would arrive. They would be young, some of them younger than she had been when she first checked a ballistics textbook out of the base library and read it 3 times in a weekend. They would arrive confident. Some of them would arrive with the specific, sealed confidence that comes from being told, repeatedly, that they are already excellent. She was going to work with that, not against it. She had learned that sealed confidence was not the enemy of precision. It was just an earlier version of it, waiting to be opened. She was going to teach them the mathematics first, then the mechanics, then the patience, then the hardest part, the understanding that the shot was not the beginning of the work and not the end of it. The shot was the last thing. Everything before the shot was what actually decided whether people came home. She picked up her rifle case. She walked off the range. She drove back to the intelligence section because there were 3 assessments outstanding and a planning document that needed finishing, and she had always held the 2 jobs to the same standard. She was going to keep doing that, one shot at a time, until the next cohort understood what she was trying to give them, and the cohort after that, and the one after that, until the lesson had traveled far enough that someone who needed it would find it already waiting, the way she had once needed it and found nothing waiting at all. That was the standard. She had set it at 20 years old, alone on a civilian range in a Manitoba field on a cold October afternoon, with a borrowed rifle and a library book, and the quiet, absolute certainty that precision was not something given to you. It was something you built,